I'm Barsha Ravichandran. I'm a junior consultant at Turner and Townsend, and today we are joined by Mark Holt and Samantha Patton from Procure Plus. It's going to be a very interesting masterclass. This is a brief introduction on completing your mobilization confidence assessment. So, an MCA is very important before we start your service because it is to identify what are your challenges, what are your barriers, and build a strategic plan to maximize the project success and generate a tailored one-on-one session to produce an action plan which will be useful further. So I hope all of you get your MCAs done. If not, we have a link below which can help you book your MCA by today through your support managers. Now, without further ado, let me pass over to Samantha and Mark to take who are going to introduce themselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning and welcome to this webinar today regarding the preparing of effective supplier contracts for retrofit projects, which is being delivered today by Procure Plus in Manchester. As a quick introduction, I'm Mark Holt, I'm the Commercial Manager at Procure Plus. I'm joined today with our quant surveyor, Sam Patton, and we at Procure Plus have a number of years of experience now delivering retrofit projects. Looking at retrofit work projects, there is a different approach than a traditional contract, and the purpose of today's webinar is for yourselves just to consider what makes an effective supplier contract. For example, the works have funding agreements with payments dependent on certification of completion of the works. And what we've found with emerging new suppliers, they don't necessarily understand the sort of the sort of funding requirements, the requirements on certification, completing and evidencing documentation. So it's really important with that compliance process that's fully documented within the contract terms and conditions. Looking at the funding, also the necessary accreditations which the suppliers and their subcontractors need to hold. That needs to be really clear in the documentation as well. And it's not to assume that the bidders are experienced in completing these sort of funded schemes. That's certainly our experience in the last 5 to 6 years. But also the standard forms of contract do require amendments to incorporate the changes, not only in the funding arrangement, but also the past 2035 protocols and how those sort of dovetail into the main contract. So I'll just quickly go through today's agenda. So we've done the introduction, a little bit of an overview of sort of the types of contracts. We then want to just go through with you just the sort of key contract terms and issues. It's more of a checklist of what needs to be included in a good contract. We've then got a little bit of a discussion then regarding contract mobilisation and the importance of looking at past 2035, how that interaction with the design, with the measures, with those approvals, how that works and how that needs to be covered by additional articles in the contract so that you've got that actual clear definition of what's required from the supplier. So then if there is an issue, you can escalate that and get that resolved and understood. We've done a little bit talking about sort of on the wall homes, on a little bit, predominantly that's to do with collateral warranties and homeowners agreements. And then I'll hand you then back to Rise then for their upcoming events. Obviously, we'll have questions and answers at the end on that one. So for the overview of the contracts, I'll hand you over to my colleague Sam, who will just take you through to that. Thank you.
Thank you. So hi everyone. So we're just going to have a look at the types of contracts to start with, and then we'll do a little bit more detail from there. So there are a few forms of contracts that can be used when completing the works. There's the JCT and the NEC, which are the most popular. We've looked at these, and the NEC contracts are better suited to large complex projects. Therefore, today we're going to be concentrating on the JCT contracts that are available. So the forms that are most suited to this type of retrofit works are the JCT measured term contract, the intermediate form of contract with or without design, the design and build contract, or the minor works contract. So under the measured term contract, an employer can issue an initial order to undertake the retrofit assessments, preparation of the retrofit design, and agreement of the required scope of works before an order is issued. An order for required works cannot be issued if the design has not been prepared. There is a process to follow under a past 2035 before this is achieved. The required measured term contract can cater for this process. With the other contract, the intermediate or design and build, it's assumed that the assessment, design and scope of works phase has already been done before the parties enter into the main contract for the works. You can't enter into the main contract without the agreed scope price of works. So what's the best form of contract to use? So we need to look at many things here. So what do you want to achieve with the project? How do you want it at start and completion date that you need to set to? Do you want the ability to add further properties, or is it just one particular block that you're looking at? Do you wish to extend the project? What are your experience of contracts? We find that the JCT is quite user-friendly and well-known within the industry. Do you want it to be flexible? Do you want any option to extend with it? What sort of work is being undertaken there? And what is your approach to risk? The works also may require an assessment period for surveys and inspections of the properties. You might need to complete an evaluation for that property, the detailed designs, any approved measures, the specification and cost and programme for the delivery of those works on the property needs to be agreed. So any other elements that you need to look at? So along with the contract, you will add in the schedule of amendments, and this will be provided to help with any specifics from the standard contract to incorporate the nature of the works. So any retrofit requirements, KPIs, your past 2035 protocol, any design specifications, and maybe a copy of the homeowner agreement. Another consideration you'll need to factor in is if there's going to be a consultant required for the project. So their roles will need to be considered, and if they apply, and again, the homeowners agreement, that might apply as well. So any other considerations we need to look at? So when you're completing your contracts, you need to make sure you've got a clear and comprehensive list of goods and services that you wish to use. You need to make sure that you factor in the length of the contract, so that's clear, especially if there's funding involved. Who's going to be involved with the contract? So your parties, is there a client and contractor? Is there a consultant? Is there a third party? Is there going to be a homeowner? And you need to also look at options to extend as well. So with the additional retrofit provisions, you also need to consider the past 2035 considerations. Any funding agreements that you're going to be looking at, is there any deadlines that they need to be done by? Evidence of works completed, so this needs to be evidenced and lodged onto Trustmark. Any suggested list of accreditations required to demonstrate competency for the retrofit works. You also need to consider if some or all of these are required in the context of the retrofit works that you're actually completing at the time, depending on the nature of the works. So your key contract terms and issues. So there are a number of issues that you'll need to have a look at, that you'll need to decide before you start to draft your contract. So you'll need to look at your levels of insurance, how to escalate any disputes and provide a clear resolution process. You need to look at who's going to do the CDM role and state the principal designer and principal contractor roles, and this will need to reference back to your PCI information. Does the tender required price need to be fixed? If not, when does the price change and how is it calculated and measured? So for any projects that you might have that are running over a number of years, you may wish to include some fluctuations after a number of years, and then you need to write that into the contract so everybody knows when they will apply. Monitoring of the contractor performance, actions for failures, so your KPIs, are you going to have meetings to discuss those? How's that going to be escalated and resolved? Does the client require any parent company guarantees? Details for the payment terms, not just the final payment dates, but the frequency of the valuations and how the value is calculated. Are you looking to do this on a monthly basis? Are you looking to do this when every project's finished for each property? Following the lodgement, is this going to be a work in progress that's going to be assessed as you're going along? How do both parties terminate the agreement if something goes wrong and you decide to both terminate it? What any damages and payments that may be required for one party if the works are not completed? You also need to be clear on how the contract administrator role is managed with disputes with the residents and accepting the finished work, your handover agreements, how that's going to be done. And finally, does it require a performance bond? And if it's required, this needs to be agreed pre-award to the contractor so that the contractor can factor this in.
Thanks. Yeah, so just moving on from looking at the sort of the key contract terms and issues, what you need to consider is the type of contract, whether or not it's a lump sum with fixed dates, with an extension of time provision, or does it require that the measures will follow the award of the works, where you'll have a contract where, in effect, it'll be a schedule of rates, and as the work's known, then there'll be a mechanism under the contract where those can be provided to the contractor in like a formal works order on an individual basis. So that ties into the earlier slide that Sam did, looking at what actually you're looking to achieve, how's that follow through. Looking at the funding agreements, how is that tied into the contract? That really is key. Now, we'd recommend that goes through as an additional article at the front of the contract, and include a redacted copy of those funding agreements so the contractors have full knowledge of what's relevant to them. That's to ensure that the contract does comply with those funding requirements, because that's key, that they ensure that the funding is available, but also that the requirements differ from order to order. So you need to build into the contract that flexibility, that where the work the employer is subject, for example, wave 3 funding are similar. So it does need to give that flexibility built into it. The definition of the funding requirements need to intentionally to be flexible as well. So that's something you need to really consider and to take account of this. For example, we've recently sort of redrafted our schedule amendments for our retrofit works, taking into account past 2035, and it's a heavily amended version of the latest Joint Contract Tribunal contracts which have come through, which make them suitable retrofit works. And what we've looked to do is place an obligation on the employer or the contractor who receives that funding, so that in relation to any works order, that they'll be sort of notified from time to time. So it provides that obligation where you can actually sort of provide that funding received in relation to the works and make those changes as the works goes through. The drafting of the PAS 2035 requirements is key, as I've just mentioned, and that's in respect of sort of the installer of the works and the retrofit consultancy roles to ensure that they've got competency to undertake that work. So what we've seen under a number of schemes is there has been issues from the consultancy side, and some of the design measures haven't been up to sort of scratch in the surveys, but also some of the contractors have struggled as well. So the contractor needs that right to request a replacement where the contractor fails to demonstrate that compliance once the work's been awarded. That's really important. And that drafting needs to be really clear that if the contract doesn't comply, the employer will be able to then sort of offset any lost funding arrangements through to the delays to the contract. Now, that's obviously needs to be subject to the contract's right to an extension of time claim. So if there's beyond an agreed extension of time, it could be exceptional weather, or it could be delays on part of the employer giving access. There's obviously needs to be that provision where the contract could be extended. Then obviously, and just the note as well is obviously meeting those funding timescales as well. You need to bear in mind with that how the retrofit assessments are carried out and who's actually undertaking those detailed designs. Is it prepared by the contractor, or is it prepared by the other people moving forward? And then looking at retentions as well. So on the retention funds, will having a retention fund support any defects following completion of the works as well? And as Sam mentioned there on performance, clean, measurable key performance indicators to monitor performance, and then also looking at damages as well and warranties. If there is going to be damages, it needs to be a fair pre-estimate of what the loss is going to be to the client. So, for example, if the job overruns, there could be supervision costs, but also there could be that sort of funding, the loss of the funding as well, which needs to be beared in mind. When you're looking at sort of contract queries through the tender, you need to also consider this ties in with the contract that's provided at tender stage. The approach to how you're going to manage change needs to be considered, and variations for the work as well, because the nature of retrofit works is working on existing properties. There's always going to be that scope for change. So when you're looking at the pricing documents, you need to then consider ensure the pricing schedule is comprehensive and accounts for the type of works that's required so that the contract then matches up with that. Now, once that detailed design has been prepared by the contractor or the consultant employed by the employer for a property, the contractor then needs to look how that's going to be then fed into the price, where the works is going to be programmed, how it's going to be valued, and how that change process is going to work as the contract works through. Under a framework where you've got direct awards, there is issues then where then you're looking to agree contract terms for the tenders, but you need to ensure that those changes aren't material changes to the tender. So it's key that once the schedule of amendments and the contract's being issued at tender stage or at direct award stage, if it's under a framework, you need to be clear then that those changes that the contractors are proposing don't actually make a material change moving forward. Then just moving on to contract mobilisation, because that is key, because the contract and mobilisation ties in with the former contract. So if you want an effective supplier contract, you need to bear in mind that contract needs to demonstrate, record how the work is going to be, in effect, how the work is going to be undertaken with reference back to specifications, key performance indicators, funding agreements, the PAS 2035 protocols, those sort of key bits of documents need to be incorporated into it. So just moving on to the signing of the contract and mobilisation, it's key to include that at this stage because that forms part of what is an effective contract. So, for example, there needs to be a clear process of the award. So will yourselves be issuing a letter of intent with perhaps a set value so you get that earlier contract engagement on the solutions? This type of work requires potentially joint surveys, potentially the use of pre-construction services agreement where you've got a lump sum contract. You need to look at the pitfalls of actually starting a scheme and then that fully understanding how the survey is completed. Is it fully understood the level of work that's been required? Does the pricing document cover all the potential measures that you're going to be doing? Is it clear at that stage that you're not going to face contractors looking for price changes, variations, because we haven't been clear in the documents? And that needs all referencing back. And also how you notify bidders of the outcome. So the reason we put that in is that where you've got an effective contractor that's been applied under that, how is that work notified? So at tender stage, is it potentially that you would run a competition and then maybe have a reserve contractor in place with a contract which sits alongside the original contract? So if you get performance issues, have you got that ability to, without the need then to do a full re-procurement, can you then bring in in effect a second supplier to actually pick that work up? That needs to be sort of thought about and actually brought into that moving forward. Then you've got to then look at the issue of a draft contract at the ITT at tender to enable the contractors to comment on that and understand what they're signing up for. What we've seen is that where we issue tenders, when you get the award to the contractor, certainly on some of the larger tier one organisations, they want to then start rewriting all the terms and conditions. And obviously that's something that's a red line with us in that we won't accept that, but we encourage the suppliers at tender stage to actually raise those queries, and then working with the client, then you can then understand and then develop a clean schedule of amendments and contract that both parties are willing to sign up to moving forward, and agree, and also agreeing at that early on who's actually going to sign the contract as well. Is it going to be at sort of a operational level? If it's a local authority, do you have to wait for cabinet meetings for approvals? All that needs bringing into that process as well and making it clear, because mobilisation periods, once they then form part of the contract, then it's key then that can be developed further. As we've mentioned in the presentation, these works may require initial assessment period for surveys, inspection of the property, the development of option appraisals for the property, the development of detailed designs. Those detailed designs need approving, the measures need approving. There is that process where then you require the works to be clear in line with the specification that's in the contract. The schedule of pricing, the individual rates, is that sufficient to actually ensure you can value the works? Does the programme of works for the delivery of those works, does that meet the contract terms? And if there's a provisions for extension of time, how does that impact on the funding agreement? So these are all things that you need to bring up at the beginning of a contract to make it really clear moving forward. This is what the contractors tendered on, what they've signed up for, what the consultants and what the clients understand their obligations as well. So to ensure that when you've had that mobilisation and programme, it does incorporate all the, the past 2035 requirements. For example, if a contract's drafted on the basis of, for example, the employer's retrofit coordinator will produce the option appraisal, or the contractor approves the optional appraisal, how that works through then for that signing off and approving that, that's key. That process needs building into that, and the contract that you've issued under the scheme needs to replicate that process and be covered, so that the contract drafted at tender stage will be then the basis of moving forward for the contractor or the employer, depending on how it's structured, the contract, develop that technical design for each of the measures that's been completed under retrofit works, and the contractor then will then carry out those works in accordance with those designs. So that's key. So then, just in summary, just in summary, looking at the life of the contract. So the type of contract drafted, needs an amended set of clauses. So that's to cover not only the funded elements, but also the nature of retrofit works. And then you've got clear obligations on the parties so you can manage disputes. Because the reason you get disputes is you get uncertainty where the two parties don't understand what their obligations are, to make that really clear in the contract, so that then the contract provides both parties. Sam touched on it earlier regarding payments, how they're valued. We see on the live schemes we've got the funding agreements and the lodgements, the requirement for detailed designs. It can be sort of several months before the actual supplier receives payments. That needs to be really clear in the documents so they understand how and when they'll be paid and what the frequency of those payments will be made. And then enabling the employer then to actually instruct the contractor then of, if it's a schedule of works type arrangement where it's the measure's been agreed, there's been a detailed survey undertaken, the measure's been agreed to the property, it's valued, it's then issued as a works order to the contractor. It's really clear then how that's managed and the budgets is controlled. And if that's covered in the contract, it enables then both parties then don't have a dispute then regarding when payments are due. How delays are treated, funding, yourselves working on these types of schemes, the sort of timescales are really tight. There's a lot of pre-construction works with design and surveys required. So how is that treated in the contract? How is extension of time covered? Is it really clear that what will be eligible for an extension of time, what will be eligible for extension of time with costs? So if there's an element where the contractor is going to recover prelim costs, that needs to be clear in the contract, or whether it's going to be an extension in time at the contractor's risk with no reimbursement of site running costs, those kinds of things, or whether there's an instance where there'll be no extension in time requirement and the contractors have got to take that risk on board. That needs to be really clear. How you manage price changes. So if the contract is a fixed price contract, it needs a fixed start date, finish date. If the award has been made over a number of years, over 18 months, there is going to be a fluctuation clause incorporated that needs built into the contract, but you need to ensure the pricing document is comprehensive and accounts for the type of work that's being changed, so it mitigates those price changes. Where you do have a fluctuation clause, it needs to be really clear how that's valued, when that valuation takes place over the life of the contract, and at what basis it's valued from. So is it valued from when the job is tendered, awarded? Is it valued 12 months in front? Is it valued? All those need to be really clear in our contract, so there's no uncertainty from the actual supplier moving forward. And then finally, is looking at any material sort of challenges, specs and delays. Looking at specifications on retrofit work. There's a lot of new technologies coming in, air source, heat pumps, ground source, some of the control systems you've got. There's obviously new things coming onto the market. How does the contract bring into those new technologies? Certainly with the back in the pandemic, we had issues with supply chain issues, getting materials. How does the contract cover those sort of material challenges? We'd recommend you put additional articles in the contract to cover specified materials. And then what that does is it places a an obligation on the contractor that they're satisfied the suitability of that product that has been in the specification, but also they will be able to obtain those product warranties, which is key for sort of the ongoing management maintenance of the properties, the homeowners, the residents, sort of the owner of the properties, but also then for the funding agreements as well, what's required in the funding agreement. And then finally, just touching on the sort of mainly warranties, but looking at that on the funding agreements, is when you're looking at retrofit works that are grant funded, the collateral warranties protect the investment of the funded work. So it's ensuring that those collateral warranties are incorporated into the contract. They've been provided at tender stage for comments from the suppliers bidding for the work. And the importance of putting a collateral warranty is it establishes that direct contractual relationship between the sort of employer, the contractor, potential future third party. That could be a social housing fund. It could well be an occupier that purchased the property under right to buy. Will it enable the warranties that have been undertaken to the work be transferred over? Certainly if a property is mortgaged in the future, the mortgage lender is going to want to know what works have been completed, have been completed by, what kind of warranties are in place, just to make sure that's really covered. And then looking forward then at the homeowners, the next slide. Then looking at sort of like local grants with the homeowners receiving the grant for retrofit works. If the contractor failed to deliver the works, what agreed standards have been put in place to start with. That's really key. So a collateral warranty will provide the homeowner with that reassurance as well. So they've got a direct relationship with the contractor, but also potentially the subcontractors and a consultant as well, so that all the parties are covered moving forward. When you look at the local grant, you've obviously got homeowners, you've got the employer who's delivering the works, and you've got the contractor. Now, one of the key document that needs to be included in the contractor is that homeowner agreement. Now, the homeowner agreement potentially won't be completed for all the properties, but the wording of that contract needs to be provided to the contractors who are bidding for the work, needs to be agreed and incorporated into the contract. And what a homeowner agreement does, it provides the homeowner with a legally binding, simple contract, really, which then enables it to be signed by both the homeowner and the contractor for the duration of works. And it provides a list of terms of agreements of what's expected from both parties. So from the homeowner, it's providing access and working with the contractor. For the contractor, it's working to agreed standards, but also a simple term regarding who's going to sign off in the works. So if, for the consultant managing the works, that responsibility they will have for valuing that works, ensuring it's to a satisfied standard. If there is a dispute with the homeowner, it could well be they won't let access in because they're not happy with some of the measures that have been undertaken, or they're not happy with the level of work that's being offered to them. It just provides that framework, a legal framework then to protect all the parties, to ensure then that if there is a dispute, it can be resolved quickly. And then that provides both parties then with that sort of really strong relationship right down from the main contractor to the employer to the homeowner, so that you get that full flow of documentation both sides. So what you want with a contract is you want a flow of information. So the information will flow down from the contractor to the supplier to the employer, through their supply chain, through the subcontractors, consultants, subconsultants, if they've got responsibility for retrofit design, and the supply chain. And you want to ensure then that the homeowner and a future third party owner on the social housing fund has that ability then to have that warranty time through, so that if there is in the future any claims, they can be actually then passed over to the employer moving forward. Thank you.